record this. So that'll just let you know that in case they can't make it in, and Kathy also want to listen in to our discussion tonight. So yeah, I hope you had an okay Christmas, and Rosemary had a quiet Christmas. Georgianne, everything go okay?
Yeah, my son was gone.
Yeah.
He's stuck back on the tug, and they don't think he's getting off tomorrow because the guy called in sick.
Oh, shoot.
He's already been gone 3 weeks.
Wow. Yeah, everybody's facing the COVID thing now because so many people are getting it. You know, I had a staff. We used to do a Christmas party, but it was always so busy. So Jonathan and I put a thank you party on for our whole staff, and we do it on right around Epiphany. So we call it an Epiphany party. So we had that scheduled for Friday, but we decided to cancel it because we thought it's probably not a good idea to put the whole staff all in one little confined space and have dinner together at this point.
They may not even have hearty meals on Wednesday.
They might, mainly just because of the road conditions.
Yeah.
If CK is shut down, then they don't do it. So
yeah.
At this point, we're not making any more changes. We're letting people decide, because the vaccines on board, this new variant doesn't seem to be too bad, but I'll wait to hear from Amy if that's true or not. So
you are correct. It doesn't seem as bad.
It doesn't seem as bad. Yeah.
No, I mean, you can still get sick, but people aren't going to the hospital. And if they do go to the hospital, they're not dying like they were with the Delta. So
right.
That's the good news.
That is the good news. Are you getting slammed pretty good?
Well, I work out at Bangor now, and we haven't been able to go because of the weather out there. So it's not been too bad.
Aren't you getting ready to retire?
No, I have 3 more years.
Oh, the name is Rosemary.
I retired last week.
Last week, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
December 31st.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's huge. That's fantastic.
Yeah, today is my first full day of retirement, so we'll see how I feel in a couple weeks about it.
Yes, right. Well, I always love to help people who are retired find things to do.
Okay for now, thank you.
Good for you. That's great. That's one of the things I say in orientation night for those who end up joining. I say, the church is about fulfilling people, not positions. And so one thing to make sure you have a good experience in your church is it's okay to say no. So anyway, but yeah, no, you get your feet, you get settled in this retirement thing. That's awesome. I'm very happy for you. I'm looking forward to, what do I get? I may have to do another, by the time I get to retirement, I think I'll have to go to 70, I think. So we'll see. I've probably got another 10 at least to go. So, but I love it. So that's cool. So, all right. Well, we're recording. We got it. Welcome to our last session. We're not going to be necessarily icebreaker things. So I'm going to get my presentation up here. There we go. If you want to put me on the top right, it works if you know how to do that. Or you can put the whole class on the right, and we'll see how that works. So this is where we started a number of months ago now, back in October. And really what we've been talking about, to say it again, is that we're talking about following Jesus. We're not talking about following a particular church or denomination, as much as we can celebrate those different expressions of the Christian faith. We're talking about following Jesus. Jesus did put his church on earth to give the word and sacraments to people. And so that you can't really separate Jesus and the church, and yet you can, because the church is pointing to Jesus. The church isn't Jesus, but the church has the gospel. That's its mystery that we're supposed to steward, and it has the sacraments. So it has the word and sacraments, and that's the way it connects people to Christ, and that's the mission of SLC. And so there is then a journey following Jesus, and that's what we've been talking about. What does that look like? We've talked about all these things here. Let's see. We've talked about the gospel, the word, Luther's story, the Lutheran movement, baptism, communion. We've looked at the creeds, in particular the Apostles' Creed. We've looked at the discipleship map. You looked at that, I think, online. And then we talked about worship, the process and content, that we're not watching, we're working, that we're in a countercultural process in the way Silverdale Lutheran worships. We went over all the different components of our worship service and why we do them, when we do them. You can always go back and visit those sessions to review some of that. And then we talked the last time about some practical things, prayer and spiritual gifts and financial giving, as I remember. And then tonight we're finishing up with ethics, the place that's sometimes the hardest for us to talk about. I often joke, and I may have already said it in this class, that churches used to split over doctrine and like predestination or these types of things, or justification by grace, or word alone versus something else, or this church structure or the church hierarchy. And these were things that Christians get upset about and wigged out about, but now we get upset about ethics and social issues, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It just seems to be where the rubber meets the road for a lot of folks. I do have it as the last class because, in my view, Christian ethics here flow. Let's see, get my pencil going. The Christian ethics here flow from everything else, in particular from this stuff, from this side of the equation. And so I don't talk about that first, but a lot of people want to know how we stand on this or that before they even take a class like you're doing. So I hope you don't run into anything tonight that's, oh, I wish I'd have known that at the beginning. So anyway, so we'll talk about that tonight. We'll talk about how does the church and culture engage and interact, and what are some of the differences between Christians on that. So we're talking about what we do. Let's see here. I think just if I can, I'm gonna do something here. We'll do that. All of you, just minimize everybody so you can see this. So you've often heard this message, right? Church and politics don't mix. Two things you're not supposed to talk about with your family. Thanksgiving dinner, church and politics. By the way, I've got you minimized so I can't see you, so feel free to interrupt me or throw in a verbal question. So you hear this a lot. Church and politics don't mix. And yet, in the last, I would say, especially the last 30 years, this has always been an issue. History of Christianity, but in particular, what I'm going to say, you might have remembered the Moral Majority, as it was called, Jerry Falwell's church, and he started this. It was certainly in the Republican Party, very conservative Christian ethic, and but not just championing certain values, but getting involved politically and electing candidates who champion those, and so Jerry Falwell completely said no to this statement, church and politics don't mix. In fact, he said, no, Christianity should transform the culture, should affect the government, and we want Christian people in office who are going to championing certain values, etc. thing that there was a reaction to that, not that it wasn't there long before that, is that from some of the mainline churches, which I think probably if you take the Methodist Church in the United States or the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Presbyterian Church USA, the United Church of Christ congregations, to the Episcopal Church USA. These all kind of went a different direction with church and politics. They embraced that, yes, the church should affect policy and politics, but they kind of went at it from a more, what to use a unfortunate and difficult, we struggle with language around some of this, like conservative liberal, but what might be today called more of a woke ethic, more of a liberal ethic when it comes to politics. And so they got very involved. Like the ELCA has an office for public policy. It's what it used to be called. In our area, it's called the Faith in Action Network, and where they've joined up with other like-minded churches. And they fought for social issues very similar to the way Jerry Falwell did, but except for very different when it comes to the specifics. And so a lot of times, in current times, the church has said, no, we want a public church. We don't want a church that's separated from society. We think the church should transform society. We think it should be involved in these issues. The mainline churches would cite and look at the civil rights movement. Obviously, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he was a Baptist preacher, an American Baptist preacher, not Southern Baptist. You know, he was bringing his faith into the political world. But it's interesting, I would say, and I've done a lot of study of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I'm certainly no expert, but I think it would be fair to say that he was trying to make society more just, and he called the country to be more true to its creeds. And he was motivated by his Christian faith, but he wasn't trying to Christianize, if you will, the government. He wanted it to see it be just, more righteous, but he still lived a separation there. But nonetheless, he brought his public faith, his faith in Christ, into the public realm. And the Black church is notorious, and notorious isn't the right word, well renowned for being very involved in politics. I know Randy Randolph, who grew up in the South in our congregation, it wasn't unusual at all to have politicians come and be talking in churches. You know, they didn't have this worry about that separation, and that may be a strength and may not. But so a lot of our, I know the ELCA folks, a lot of my colleagues and the leadership of the ELCA over the last 20, really 30 years since it's in existence, really, have said the church was too quiet back there in the civil rights movement. We want a church that's involved and active in championing, you know, for a more just society. So this church and politics thing, it used to be a mainstay. You keep politics out of church, but that's been challenged as of late. Mainline denominations have become very involved in politics, and even like the Missouri Synod, like we've talked about, the difference between the ELCA and the Missouri Synod, some in this class, they used to kind of stay out of politics, but now they're getting more and more involved, but they're getting more involved in a different way than like the ELCA is, championing different policies, et cetera. Like they're particularly focused on abortion and being pro-life and you know, whereas the ELCA is social action is more around immigration and poverty and human sexuality issues, you know, equal rights, GLBTQ types of advocacy. So whereas the Missouri Synod, Lutherans you know, so anyway, so everybody's kind of getting involved a little bit. And I would like to hold up tonight a difference between morality and political and social action. What do I mean by that? Well, how does the church interact? We're gonna look at H. Richard Niebuhr's book, Christ and Culture, just to touch on it. But the question is, how do individuals or how do Christians affect the culture? Do we do it individually or as a group or both? You know, the ELCA, like I mentioned, we have social statements on all kinds of issues. And these go through a whole process of documents created by a commissioned group, and then it goes out to the congregations. They give feedback. Then it's worked on supposedly using the feedback from the congregations. Then it goes back out to congregations, more feedback, and finally it goes to our church-wide assembly, our big national convention, where representatives from all the different parts of the church, all, I won't say congregations, but from all the synods, from all the geographical areas, vote on those. Now, even once they vote for them, that doesn't mean you have to believe or agree with them. These are teaching documents. So that's one way that the ELCA is involved, is it confronts these social issues and it makes these social statements. And then, you know, as a Christian, you get to look at those to try and inform your opinion and viewpoint on things, but you don't have to agree with them. But they do use those social statements to advocate for things. They have lobbyists. Our ELCA has lobbyists, and we have Social Action Network that lobbies in the state of Washington, and there's a church, you know, so they do use those to involve and confront social issues as a group. And so here's the question right there. So this is where it starts to get tricky when it comes to the church and politics, or the church and social action, or as the our national church body likes to call it, the public church, is when you start wanting the church as a group to be involved in social issues. What's the obvious problem? What do you think? Like, what? Let's say SLC said, we are against we're against we want, or let's put it this way. Let's say the ELCA were to say, we want more stringent gun control, and so we put a petition in our narthex. Problem with that? What's the positive of it?
I think it could cause division amongst the parishioners, the people in the church, and then that could kind of snowball into all kinds of other problems too.
That's right. That's right, Rosemary. Then people start saying, well, this church isn't for me, not about whether it preaches the gospel or administers the sacraments rightly, but does it agree with my convictions about a particular social issue? So that's the tricky tightrope we walk here. Did we lose Amy? Are you still out? Oh no, Amy's there. Yeah. So that's the kind of tightrope we do walk in some respects here when it comes to social issues and how involved we get in those particular, you know, how the church as a group. Now, so you know, just like you said, there's going to be diverse views in a congregation. I can tell you that at Silverdale Lutheran, we have people that are very involved in forming the Republican Party's platform in the state of Washington. We have people in Silverdale Lutheran that are very involved in helping the Washington State Party, Democrat Party, form its platform. We even for a while had someone that was a founding member of the Tea Party. They're no longer part of the congregation, but we have people all over the map on political issues. So if as a church we start championing a particular issue, whether it be immigration reform, and personally, I don't know anybody that doesn't think it doesn't need reform, but just how you do it is the question. So what I want to hold up here is the first thing when it comes to Christian ethics is I think the church champions morality, justice, fairness, truth, respect for people, and each person then goes into the voting booth and does their thing. It's it actually, people on the far right and the far left really don't appreciate my opinion on this. Because I feel like a Christian can be a very hardcore Republican, and a Christian can be a very hardcore Democrat or libertarian or whatever it is. I don't make politics a religion. But again, the problem I think today is that we've made politics a religion, and that's why we can't talk to each other anymore, because it's risen to a level. So, like, for instance, let's take God's preferential action, care for the poor. I think it would be safe to say that when you read the scriptures and you read the Old Testament prophets and you look at Jesus, that God has a heart for the outcasts and the downtrodden. I think that it'd be hard to argue with that. Now, how do you advocate for the downtrodden is the question. A former bishop of mine, Rob Hofstadt, who was the bishop before our current bishop in our synod, said, caring for the poor is not an option, but how you do it is. And I've always appreciated that. I think we can agree to disagree on what is the best way to confront poverty. And one side says, the more you help, the more you hurt. Another side, I had one pastor in our synod said to me, Bill, there isn't one government thing that gives money to the poor that's wrong. It's all good. Like, well, I don't know that I'd want to make that clear statement. There is something like there is a kind of what do you call it, enabling that can happen. I've talked to an apartment manager of a very low income area in Bremerton, and she has a heart for people who are struggling and who are poor, but she said a lot of these programs do just end up enabling people. They don't really help them. So it's tricky. It's difficult. It takes wisdom. And I think Christians can disagree on how to help in society, not whether or not they should be involved, but how. And I think the other thing I'm going to say here is I really feel like the way Christians transform society is individuals. But we'll get into that some more. So where do you draw the line in the church? When it comes to politics, and so it depends on the congregation. SLC is a church that has drawn a pretty solid line. We're going to advocate justice. We're going to advocate for people caring for the poor, and we're going to do things to enable and equip and strengthen and whether it be Hearty Meal or the things Kathy Bowman as our community connector has been doing, and helping teachers and helping low-income apartments and advocating. We're going to do all of that, but we're going to stop short of championing a particular position when it comes to political stuff. But other congregations don't. They are very politically active, and some people want that kind of church. We would split right down the middle, in my view. That's what I love about our congregation, and yet what is also sometimes a struggle is that when it comes to social state issues, whether it be human sexuality issues or some of the other hot button issues, I think we'd go right down the middle. So yeah, so there you go. Let me put up a little bit more info, and then we'll stop. And I want to hear your wisdom, because I'm I'm kind of sharing with you where I'm at with a lot of this and where our church has been. But I really want to hear from you about, does this make sense? And what do you think? This scary guy, this is the only picture I could find of him. He does not look like, he looks kind of scary to me. But anyway, this is H. Richard Niebuhr, who wrote a classic book called Christ and Culture. It's been criticized widely to some degree, but it has really gone through the test of time, that he pretty much laid out the different ways Christians and the church interact with culture. And one way is that when you look historically at the way Christians have worked in culture, is Christ against culture. This one right here. So this is the folks that withdraw from society. Think about those like Mennonite or Quaker, although it's not quite the same, but the Hutterites in Montana, and these groups that have said culture is so hopelessly messed up, the only way we can work is to withdraw and make our own little separate Christian community and really have no interaction with the outside world. This is Christ against culture. You've heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Most people believe that the community that's responsible for those, there's a little community that's been unearthed and archaeologically and excavated called Qumran. And clearly there was a branch of Judaism that we hear about from Josephus, the Jewish historian, called Essenes. And these were folks that withdrew from society. They believed that the Jerusalem establishment, the Jewish establishment, was completely corrupt, as well as the Roman Empire, obviously. And the answer is to withdraw. So this is Christ against culture. But to me, and Niebuhr makes this point that, Jesus said, let your light shine. Biblically, you just don't see a justification for this kind of complete withdrawal. But then there's the opposite of that, and what he would call Christ of culture. And this is where Christians really take the values that are championed in whatever culture they're in and just kind of merge those into Jesus. Niebuhr felt like the Gnostics of the 2nd and 3rd century were an example of this. I would say this is an example. Some people would criticize I don't know that this would be completely fair, but because, I think that whether conservative or liberal, the Christians I know, they're feeling they're being faithful to Scripture and not just doing what culture says. But some people would criticize some denominations today and say we're just chasing after culture, whatever culture champions. And one of my colleagues said the trouble with chasing after culture is it's always a moving target. But this is a way where you kind of inculcate the values of the culture into Christ, and you kind of mold Christ in the image of culture. And so some people would say that some of the mainline churches are doing this, or maybe some people would say, some of the evangelical churches, what they call evangelical today. One way they do this, by the way, remember when we talked about worship? And I said that a lot of the big box churches that are evangelical churches, as much as they might rail against culture, have completely succumbed to culture when it comes to the worship style. It's a show. And it's an emotional creation, which is, I'm not saying it isn't sincere, and I'm not even saying the Holy Spirit isn't there, but they have basically modeled their worship in light of culture. So, this all gets tricky and interesting. So then Christ above culture. This is where, your loyalty to Christ is above all, and culture takes a second seat. And it's related to this one in Paradox. And wouldn't you know, the Lutheran one that's classically known is the Christ and culture in paradox. I guess these two are really just expressions of the Christ above culture, but so these are kind of clarifications of the third one there. But so the Lutheran one is the hardest to describe, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it a shot. So Christ, the transformer of culture. So I'll do the last one and then go back to the one that's more classically known as the Lutheran. This is where you transform culture by transforming individuals, and they get involved in government and they start shaping and culture, and they shape the culture. So now Christ is above culture. Christ comes, Christians are devoted to Christ, and they start to influence and dictate culture. They become the driving force in the culture. Much of Western Christianity, when you think about it, Christianity became the driving force, although it was naive about how culture and power was corrupting it at the same time. But nonetheless, and again, these are broad, big statements I'm making here. But in other words, the idea is that culture's fine, it's good, but it needs transforming by Christ. And Christ came to transform that culture. That's why not just to save sinners, but to actually change the world. And this is where I think, I guess most folks would say the Reformed churches have been at, but I think this is more of where our national, the ELCA, is at. If any, our kids go to the National Youth Gathering, we're not going anymore, but basically all they got was, these are the things wrong with the world that you need to fix. So, and I'm excited about, I want our kids to enter and be involved, but that's basically what they got and what they get. So, and that's a lot of pressure for high school kids, by the way, but nonetheless, I actually asked a young adult who went to many of those gatherings, I said, and I talked about that, and he said, yeah, it's paralyzing. It's so much pressure that, on our generation, we're supposed to fix all this stuff. And I go, yeah, that's what I thought too. So, but again, I don't want to say that Christ against culture, will just withdraw and ignore culture is the way to go either. So that's where we get to the Lutheran view. And I hope this isn't just too heady stuff, but so let me just give this a try here. So Luther talked about two kingdoms, and it's been widely misunderstood, but he talked about God's left hand and God's right hand. So the left hand, which is over here, is the civil world, the world of government, the world of laws and order. And God has set up leaders. Luther would go to Romans 13, where Paul says God's put those leaders where they are. If God didn't put them there, they wouldn't be there. So that the left-hand kingdom is run by law and rules. The government's there to make sure people behave, to make sure that laws are enforced, that people don't cheat, steal, etc. That there's order, and that God has made there's a left-hand kingdom operating in this world, and we need it, and it's absolutely essential. But then there's another kingdom, which would be the right-hand kingdom, that is the kingdom of Christ, and that's what the church is supposed to proclaim. This is the Beatitudes. Think about if governments did what Jesus said in the Beatitudes. I don't know that they would exist anymore. Some people think that might be good, but I think we'd have chaos. It would. So, but when it comes to the individual Christian, I live out the Beatitudes. I follow Christ's teachings, and that's a kingdom. That's the right-hand kingdom of God. That's the kingdom of grace, where Jesus has made me righteous by the cross and resurrection, and the church is about that and proclaiming that. And so you have these two kingdoms that are in paradox. They interact with each other, but they can't be merged with each other. That's the problem with the Christ of culture, and a little bit of the Christ above culture, or the transforming culture. that we think we merge the two. No, they live separately. Let me give you a perfect example, a pastoral example. I've got lots of veterans in our congregation. I have some that fought in the Vietnam War, and they are still often haunted so many years later of the things they had to do in that war. Any veteran, World War II, Korea, Desert Storm, the Middle Eastern conflicts and wars, Afghanistan, they've had to kill, they've had to take people's lives. But they're Christian. And so they're like, oh, how can I do that as a Christian? I mean, and they feel horrible about it. But when you look at two different kingdoms here now, yes, in the right-hand kingdom, we forgive sins. We don't take life. We don't do that. But in the left-hand kingdom, we need government. We need order. We need freedom. We live in a country that is a republic that has laws, and all governments are messed up, but yet some are better than others. And so a Christian can go to war, hopefully, for right reason. The country's doing it for a good reason. That was, of course, the challenge with some of our wars. But it was less debatable in World War II, of course, when we were attacked and Hitler was doing his thing. So, that the Christian can take up arms, because that's the left-hand kingdom versus the right-hand kingdom. With my brother or sister in Christ, if they step on my toes, I don't let them have it. But in the left-hand kingdom, boy, I may have to fight for my rights with somebody. I may even have to go to court with them. I don't know, but there's a difference there. And so they're supposed to interact, but you have to distinguish them. And that's Christ in culture and paradox. And that's where classically Lutherans have been. That there's a left-hand and a right-hand kingdom. And those live in tension, but you don't merge them, but you don't completely separate them either. And that's why it's a little bit harder to get a hold of. The Christ transforming culture. See, this is the question I have. I think I'm for that if individuals do it. I don't know that the church should become that involved as a group, because I think it should change individuals, which then change the wider society. That's the way I personally think that transformation happens. But a lot of people obviously disagree with me on that, and I'm okay with that. So those are in H. Richard Niebuhr's book, Christ Against Culture, or Christ and Culture. It's a classic. Again, some people feel like it missed a lot of things, but I think it's held up against the test of time. So, well, let me pause before we go into specific examples. Look at my clock here. What are you thinking? What's your thoughts? I know, Georgianne, you've always got some good. Not putting you on the spot. What do you think about all this?
I think the hardest thing in my experience is, and I'm just as guilty, not to judge. I had an experience with the Lutheran Church in the Missouri Synod years and years ago. At the time when I was married, we got up to go have communion. And at that time, they only did communion once a month, and we were new to the area. I never gave it a thought because I was raised in the church, but because my husband had not been church going, and he wasn't confirmed a Lutheran, the pastor stood up in front of everyone, the whole congregation, and says, "You can't take communion because you're not a member here." And of course, that just turned him off to the church completely. But that was the Missouri Synod.
Yeah. Did they do that? By the way, did that happen publicly, or did he do that?
Yeah. That was in Las Vegas when I was living there.
But it happened like in front of everybody or something?
Right. We were at the railing for communion.
And he didn't just pass, so he actually said, sorry.
Well, he didn't say it loud, but enough to where the people right there could hear.
Gotcha. Yeah. So yeah, you have to give some grace, don't you?
And I have a lot of friends that are gay. I don't condone it, But I try to treat them like I would like to be treated, and I consider them friends.
Absolutely.
And I don't point my finger and say, you're doing bad.
Right.
I think a lot of people are really guilty about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just something you need to step back and say, hey, you're not perfect either.
Yeah. Well, that's helpful. I think if we could come at some of these issues with more respect, still make our viewpoint or, our convictions known, but do so in a graceful way and not a condemning way, that would help us a long way for sure.
Yeah. And I think you would bring more people into the church if people didn't respond in such a negative way, because then they look like you're putting yourself on a pedestal. Look at me, I'm so good.
Yeah. Yes, it's not a good witness when it's a tricky deal for churches to take a stand on whatever subject, on whatever side, and to do that gracefully. I love that Paul, he says something, he has a phrase, speak the truth in love, he says, I think in Romans.
Yeah.
Speak the truth in love. So when we speak the truth, but do it in a loving way. And certainly, unfortunately, the culture has often just heard that everything the church is against and that they're mean, judgmental, and this type of thing. And that's a problem. So I run into people all the time that don't want anything to do with the church because they think all the church is about is being anti this, anti that, anti whatever. And
Not being a good Christian.
yeah. So no, that's helpful, Georgianne. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I had a professor, Sister Dorothy Donnelly at JSTV.
Mm.
Was she there when you were there?
I don't think so, but I took some classes from the Jesuit school there. So
Yeah, okay. She made the statement that everybody has a C level, and it's an acronym. CEEE stands for culture, environment, education, experience. That's a given.
yeah,
Neither good nor bad. It's just a given. It's how we respond to that matters.
yeah, nice. Culture, education, experience. What was the other E?
Environment.
Environment. Yeah, all those things affect us, don't they?
Yeah, they really do. It's
Yeah.
kind of a neat way to think about it for me anyway.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's helpful. That's helpful. Culture, environment, education, and experience. Yeah. Yeah. And that CEEE affects how we look at the scriptures too.
Yes.
We as much as we want to shed all of that and just try and read what the scripture says, it's naive to think that doesn't affect us. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Helpful. Yeah. Other thoughts at this point or reactions or yeah, buts. You know. The other thing that I hear a lot from some of my colleagues is, well, look at how uninvolved the Lutheran Church was in Nazi Germany and the Catholic Church and the Reformed Church. It wasn't just the Lutherans there, because in Germany there's Catholic Church long after Luther and certainly Reformed Church, the more Calvin, followers. But they all kind of, the institution church as such kind of got swept into Hitler's, Germany, his Third Reich type thing. I think I remember seeing signs like the German Christians, or the Christian German, I forget which way it was, but and even though Hitler was not a Christian, he exploited the church. And so a lot of people today say, well, see, we can't ever let that happen again. The church didn't do anything against Hitler, so we need to be really involved, fighting the fight for whatever cause we're fighting. Now, of course, that assumes that we can all agree on what the right is. But another way to look at it is that the church got too political in Hitler's day. Totally threw in its lot with Hitler. If it would have stood apart and not gotten pulled in, it wouldn't have gotten, so you could fault the church not for being not political enough, but for being too political, because it totally merged in with Hitler.
I think part of that was fear.
Oh, of course. And a lot, the pastors that, did not support Hitler wound up on the front, and there's way more than what we have any knowledge of. The famous one, of course, is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's a Lutheran hero that you might have heard about. He came to the United States and he was so impressed with the Black church in the South in particular, in Chicago and the places he visited. And he went back and he actually participated in a plot to assassinate Hitler. And he was martyred as such. He was killed just before Germany was liberated, so to speak, or the Allied forces, got there, that they had killed him. The plot failed, but I guess it came close to being successful. And I learned about Dietrich Bonhoeffer in my social ethics class at Cal Lutheran. Ann Johnson was my professor, and we studied him to look at the problem of an ethical dilemma. So an ethical dilemma is when you have to choose between two wrongs. Oh, Georgianne left us. She'll jump back in. So there she comes. There you are. So we lost you for a second, Georgianne. No problem. So an ethical dilemma, you have two choices and they're both wrong. Dietrich Bonhoeffer believed that to kill someone, to assassinate the ruler, was absolutely wrong. It's murder. And the Ten Commandments are pretty clear about it. So he believed it was completely wrong. But he also believed to do nothing, to allow him to live, was also wrong. And he believed that no matter what he decided, he would be under the judgment of God.
Yeah.
Both were wrong. And that's always stuck with me. Sometimes in life, we have to choose between two wrongs. What's the lesser of the two wrongs? Dietrich Bonhoeffer decided he needed to try and help this effort to get rid of Hitler. And he lost his life for it. So fortunately, as a Lutheran pastor, hopefully he knew that he stood under God's grace and the right-hand kingdom. If perhaps if he really took to heart the two kingdoms, he would have said, okay, well, in the left-hand kingdom, I got to go against Hitler, but in the right-hand kingdom, it's different. So anyway, but nonetheless, those are some good examples. Okay, others, we can tackle some specific ones, but any other thoughts at this point? All right. Now's when it gets tricky, though. It's easier to talk about all this in theory. Okay, here we go. Some specific examples. Let's see here. So, human sexuality. Now, this is a cultural issue, but it's also a deeply biblical and church issue. Same-sex marriage, or the Marriage Equality Act, as we passed it in the state of Washington, then the Obergefell decision made gay marriage or same-sex marriage legal and the law of the land. So that's a big issue. And then there's the whole LGBTQ plus movement. And I like to distinguish these two because, the issue of bisexuality is related to people who have a fixed sexual orientation to the same sex, lesbian, gay, bisexual, but then transgender, that's a whole nother, that's your gender identity, not your orientation. And this gets all very confusing, some of these terms, and I really wrestle with this. Q is questioning or queer, and it stands for lots of different things. But my only trouble with this is that I think these are all very different issues. They all are important, but they all get lumped into one. The original folks who wanted to see the church change and accept same-sex marriage did so by saying that people don't choose their orientation. It's fixed. It's that way from whenever, their birth or adolescence or whatever, and they have no control over that. And so what are we going to do for folks in that situation? Now we start talking about some other things where, you know, you can make a choice about what you want and what, you know. So I just, not that they're not related, that not that there's not some intersectionality going on here, but a little different. Our ELCA church has completely thrown in 100% with this movement. The national church has. Congregations are different. The abortion issue, that's a huge issue, culture. Poverty, immigration is a big one. Both immigration from other countries and then the southern border, obviously. And then, of course, the issue around that's been such a you know, big question as of late in particular, but it's been an issue the existence of our whole country with slavery, and then Jim Crow, and then the ramifications of all of that. And now you'll hear a lot about the mass incarceration of African American individuals compared to what it was before anyway. So there's all kinds of things. So we've got all of these issues that come into effect. You know, I can tell you that it was a tough couple of Sundays after, you know, our big, with George Floyd, his death, his murder, and what does the church do? And Black Lives Matter. I had lots of people who were saying, how come we're not championing Black Lives Matter? Well, you know, it's in theory, you can talk about having a separation between church and politics and stopping with morality versus championing a certain cause. But this is where the rubber meets the road. And I did not publicly come out in support or against that, because I felt individual Christians should do that and advocate the way they want to. And if I would have done that, there's a lot of people who aren't for Black Lives Matter necessarily as a movement, but who are very much against racism and you know, this type of thing. And so it gets complex and difficult. Some people don't think it is complex. It's cut and dried, but I feel it's very nuanced and challenging. And the church absolutely has to be, and I think I have been very clear that there is no justification for treating people as a group or as an individual differently because of the color of their skin. That's the morality part. Now, how do you live that out when it comes to policies? That's where I've drawn the line on that. So, but again, some people think that's a big mistake. Some people don't. Immigration, poverty, abortion, etc. So I don't know if you want to talk, and I'm totally fine. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on some of these. I can give you a little background on the human sexuality one when it comes to Silverdale Lutheran, if you'd like. Let me stop my share so I can see you all. Does that sound good? Would you like some background on how we've handled that?
No.
You want to hear about it, Georgianne? Rosemary wants to know.
I wouldn't mind hearing some background.
Yeah. So I can tell you a little bit of our journey. I think it's good news. I think, Georgianne, you'll be happy with that we have not been condemning of people. So in 2009, although my entire 30 years plus of ministry, the church has been really, in one sense, its main energy has gone into, this, they call it issue because these are people we're talking about. They're not issues, they're people. But in 2009, after many years and lots of wrestling and working it through, and remember that our policy as a national church happens in convention. It's not, the Pope doesn't say this is the thing, or the bishops don't say this is the thing. It's more of a democratic thing. So you have all these representatives. Now the leadership's incredibly important and influential. Our church-wide bishops have definitely been very influential on this. But long story short, and I'll leave out the details, and I'm pretty familiar with most of them. The ELCA passed a social statement on human sexuality that's very thick, way too thick. People don't read it because it's a book. They needed to make about a 4-page pamphlet. But basically that social statement said, we've got people in this church that have basically 4 different positions when it comes to the gay and lesbian side of things. And, the old traditional position, you hate the sin, love the sinner. And so you say, no, any kind of homosexual expression is wrong, period, end of story. We, of course, never hate anybody, or, but that, so you have that. And then you have a couple positions in the middle where, no, could make allowances for people who are gay to be together. But yet not champion that as the same as heterosexual biblical marriage, that maybe we surround a relationship with prayer so that they could be in the church as a gay person and not feel like they don't belong. And then, so there's some nuances there. And then another would be that you recognize same-sex unions, like at, this now in the United States, it's legal everywhere. So, someone is married, well, you recognize that they're married, but you still aren't doing and performing the ceremonies. And then the last position would be that you equate that with heterosexual marriage, and the church does the weddings and signs the certificates and all of that. So this social statement said, yeah, we've got all of those in our churches and they all should be respected. People have a sound conscience, and we're going to try and hold those together. Now, how they're going to do that is a challenge, but I think it was good to recognize that the church is divided on this, and we have people who have different viewpoints. So they passed a long social statement on human sexuality that's very long, and there's lots of good things about it. It's against exploitation and promiscuity and all of this. But nonetheless, with that as the background, then they passed another resolution that congregations that wish to do so could recognize same-sex unions, what they called PALM, publicly accountable, lifelong monogamous relationships. So they used the acronym PALM, because at the time, gay marriage was illegal in all states except for New England back in 2009. So they couldn't really say gay marriage, but that's where they were headed. So they said that congregations could recognize same-sex unions that wished to do so. So they left it up to the congregations, which was both a good thing and a really tough thing. Now every congregation has to decide. A lot of congregations just ignored it and just went on and maybe dealt with it later whenever it became an issue. SLC, in my leadership, I felt like, hey, we can't just put it on the pastor to decide. This is the church. They said we could do this. Do you want to do it or you don't want to do it? So we spent, that's basically all I did for 2010 was work on this issue. We had cottage meetings, we had large group meetings. I had 20 families in my office in the first 3 months after the ELCA voted. They were very active families. 3/4 of them were ready to leave the congregation because of it. And none of them were hateful. None of them were mean-spirited or judgmental. They just said, Pastor Bill, Lutheran Church says the scriptures are the bottom line. The scriptures don't say that people of the same sex can get married. End of story. We're succumbing to the culture. Remember the Christ and culture? We're just succumbing to the culture. We're chasing after the culture.
You want to go potty?
And
No.
so that,
Here,
you
let's
know,
go potty.
it threatened. Georgianne's getting her little doggy out. I don't know
Yeah.
at this moment in this discussion or not. But anyway, okay. So so we went through a whole year, Rosemary and Al and Amy, about, you know, how does the church live into or live with this?
Go potty.
And everything was on the table as far as how we do this. We did a big congregational survey, and believe it or not, when it comes to, it was about 50-50. It was about 50-50. So there were about 25%, as I remember, of the church that wanted to leave the ELCA because of this. The other 25% who were not for the action didn't want to leave the ELCA because they didn't want to see the church split up over it. And, you know, another 25% probably didn't care about it. And then there was another 25% that were so happy that the ELCA did this and let's do this and why aren't, you know. So it was a very tough time. So I'll fast forward to the congregational meeting where what we decided. What we decided is we were not leaving the ELCA. We were going to stay in the ELCA, but we were not going to actively do gay marriages. That we were going to make room for gay people under the gospel. We're all welcome here. We're all broken people. And so all people are welcome here in that, under that, but we were not going to be doing and conducting those recognition services. So we said, we're going to stay in the church, but we're not going to do this. So thank you, but no thank you. And then the other part that the church had said along with that is that you could be served by a pastor who was in a PALM relationship, publicly accountable, lifelong monogamous, which is now marriage because it's legal. So you could be served by a gay pastor who's in a relationship. And the church also said that that would be so divisive here that it would break us apart, and said we're not going to do that. So, and then they did one final thing, and that is they allowed some people to restrict their giving so that it doesn't go to the national church, because their conscience was bound. They just couldn't support our national church. And we give about 9%. Let's see, no, we give 7.5% of everything we receive to our wider church, to the synod. And then they give that on, it's like diocese, you know, we give it, and then on to the national church. And then the other part that gets up to 10% goes to other local benevolences and stuff like that. So we allowed people to say, we want our giving not included in that percentage, and we want it, and so all of their giving goes to local benevolences. We still give close to 10% of what they give beyond our congregation, but it doesn't go to the ELCA. So we figured out how to way to do that, because for some people, they were, I gotta leave, I'm done, you know, I mean, that they were stuck that way. Obviously, if we'd have left the ELCA over this issue, we'd have lost 1/3 of our congregation there, and I didn't want that either. And so that the church, that was the compromise position the church came to in its congregational meeting. It's still enforced because we haven't changed that. I can tell you that after that meeting, we had people who were diametrically opposed and on different sides of this, hugging and crying together, supporting each other. Many people voted for this, not because there were some people who voted for this kind of compromise position who were very much against gay marriage, and there were some people that voted for it who were very much for gay marriage, but they didn't want to see this issue fracture the congregation. Our bishop at the time said we were the model for how to handle this. I don't know that that would be the the case, at this point, but that's the way we did it, and we've held together. We lost some families more on the progressive side and some more on the real conservative side, both sides. And over the years, we've probably lost folks because they don't like our kind of middle position here. So that's where this church has gotten to on this issue of, the gay and lesbian side of things. The transgender and bisexuality side of things, the social statement didn't even touch, and that was just 10 years ago or 12 years ago. And so that's where it's like so much has happened in the last 10 years that wasn't even addressed. But the ELCA has completely thrown in with that agenda, for better or for worse. And our church has kind of not been a typical ELCA church in that respect, but we're still an ELCA church. And in fact, our congregation is one of the biggest, because we're one of the largest churches in our synod. I don't know what our giving, we give over 50,000 to our synod every year from the congregation, which is, probably a half of one of the 3 staff positions the synod has. So we're very strong supporter of the ELCA, and we figured a way to kind of get through it. For now, I have no idea and what's next. I have some concerns about where we're going to stop on this journey, but I won't go into those at this point. But so yeah, does that make sense?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You were talking about the percentage that's given. Is it based on the membership, or is it something the church decides a flat percentage?
Yeah, it's a percentage of what people give. So
okay, not on membership.
Correct. It is. So let's say the church brought in 50,000 one month. 7.5% of that's going to go on to the synod of the unrestricted giving.
Okay, so
the restricted giving doesn't factor.
Another question.
Yeah.
So if the church at when this was all going on, but they devoted on, they wanted to leave, would they have lost the building, the property?
Great question. No.
No.
So this gets deep into polity.
Yeah.
But when the ELCA formed in 1988, it brought 3 different groups into one church. They merged into one, 3 into one. One of the groups was very small. It was a group that exited the Missouri Synod back in 70. But the other 2 groups were roughly the same size. And one of them was very congregational based, and that's the ALC, American Lutheran Church. And SLC was that before the ELCA. And the only way they were able to come up with a merger is that the ALC churches, if they ever left, got to keep their property. Because the other group, they were more kind of, I guess, I don't know if these are broad generalities, but they were more the church as a part of a diocese, or more a part of a, what do they call it in the Episcopal Church? Come on, Bill. Anyway, so, or Presbyterian or Presbytery, so it isn't just an individual congregation. It's, and so those congregations, the synod gets the property if they leave. But in our situation, if we would have left, we would have been able to keep the property because of our background.
Okay.
That's the only way they could get the 2 of them together. Is that was one of the compromises they made. Now, I can tell you that leaving the ELCA is very difficult. You have to have 2/3, which is 66% of the. It's hard to get anybody to vote on anything for 66%. And it's a longer process and involves 2 congregational votes, and it's very painful. And I felt pastorally, if we went down that road, we'd have definitely lost a third of our congregation, without a doubt, maybe even more. What actually happened in a lot of churches that went that route is that they got 60% of the congregation wanting to leave. Well, they don't get to leave, because you got to have 66%. So that group left a third of the congregation with trying to maintain this whole congregation. So it's been very painful and very difficult. And so again, it's an ethical dilemma. And I can say, especially 10 years ago, I would not have supported a leaving, mainly because it would have been so scarring and difficult. But anyway, so yeah.
So
Great question.
if Silverdale Lutheran Church voted to leave, then do they just become an independent church? Silverdale Church, not Silverdale Lutheran?
Great question. One of the things in the Constitution is that a church cannot leave and keep its property unless they affiliate with another Lutheran church.
Oh, so it couldn't just become Silverdale Church.
Correct. We would not be able to be an independent church. We need to join a different body. And the reason they put that in there, I found out, I always kind of wondered, that's interesting, is that in smaller congregations that had really expensive properties, what actually happened, like you might have 15 members left, and you're operating on this big endowment or something.
Mm-hmm.
And people were coming in, joining the church, and then they get the majority, and then they take the church out, and it becomes a Buddhist, or I don't know, some other church is like a hostile takeover. So that's why they put that in there, that if a Lutheran church leaves and to keep its property, it has to affiliate with another Lutheran church. And there are plenty that churches affiliate. There's the Lutheran Congregations in Mission for Christ, which is, and then there's the North American Lutheran Church, and there's obviously the Missouri Synod Lutheran. There's other churches that we could affiliate with, or we could have affiliated with. So, yeah. But yeah, so that is a caveat to the exiting process. So.
I have one more question. When I was growing up, I was involved with what they call the Walther League, but they don't have that anymore, do they? Or they just don't use the name?
They just don't use the name. So the Walther League was the youth group organization,
Yeah.
Missouri Synod. The ELCA has a youth organization. Pastor Jonathan's very involved with it, or has been, and so we still have national youth gatherings and synodical youth gatherings and that. But yeah, just a different name.
Okay.
I don't even think they call it the Walther League in Missouri anymore. Walther was the kind of founding guy of the Missouri Synod. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's kind of that particular social issue it's really, it's an issue, but my biggest thing in my 30 years of ministry, I've known many people who are gay who have poured out in tears that they cannot change. They've tried, that they, even to the point of suicide, and just their conscience has been so crushed. And they tell me, Bill, the only place I can get fellowship is in the gay bar.
Yeah, that's sad.
That's the only place I'll get acceptance. And so I've been very sympathetic to trying to make a space for gay people in the church, because I believe many, not all, but many don't choose their orientation. And that I could see the church surrounding a relationship in prayer. My own personal opinion is where I can only go so far, is I don't think we can equate it with biblical heterosexual marriage. I just that it's not the same to me. Now, I think in society, in the left-hand kingdom, a gay couple should have the same rights as a heterosexual couple. That's good. I can go with that. But I struggle with, equating those two at that level. But I definitely don't struggle with, let's make a place and have a gracious forbearance with gay people and couples, and so they receive the word and sacrament, and I think there's been enough of a case that the biblical condemnations are, that's not really the right word, but the biblical no to same-sex sexual relations were mostly in the context of promiscuous, exploitive contexts. You've got pedophilia in the ancient Greek world that Paul is likely thinking of. You've got the Canaanite fertility cults where they were doing all kinds of crazy stuff that the Hebrew folks, the folks would have been thinking about. And so I think there's enough question about is the biblical prohibitions against same-sex sexual behavior. There's enough of a case that's been made that it's very possible that what we're talking about today, two people being in a lifelong, publicly accountable, monogamous relationship, is different than what was being prohibited biblically. I'm not sure of that. I don't think that there's a way we can make the case definitively, but I think it's been made well enough that I could make a space. I think we need to try and make a space for gay people in the church, because I don't want them just to go to the gay bar for fellowship. I think that they're Christians, that Christ died for them, and the church has lost so many gay people because all they've heard is you're not acceptable here. So that's now you're hearing Bill Crabtree's wrestling with it. But I think that's really where Silverdale Lutheran, we have gay people in our church. We don't have any active or couples that are, just very visible, I guess you could say. Currently, we have many kids of our congregation who are gay. We have a transgender person that's very involved in our church and has been loved and cared for and supported, and I think that's great. I think we can do that under the gospel and still, not change all the norms, I guess you could say, is maybe where I'm wrestling with it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yep. So that is an issue that could definitely, drive us apart, but that's where this church is at. So a lot of people love that. They want to be in a church that has diverse opinions about social issues and that they can have those conversations. And we probably could be faulted that even though we disagree, we don't have enough conversations about those, but we do. I did a series in my Sunday morning class called Public Church, and we talked about immigration and gay marriage and, the whole slew, abortion, etc. The ELCA has a statement on abortion that it passed early on in its life and back in 1993, and it's very much a pro-life statement, although it does talk about, in cases of rape and incest, and that it's only an option of last resort, but it does stop short of making abortion illegal. It does not support that, but from just a moral standpoint, it's a pretty pro-life statement. I won't be surprised if it isn't up for change here in the next few years, but because it's way too pro-life, I think, for most of the ELCA leadership now. But anyway, that's another thing. So yeah. Okay, so there we go. We got the social issue discussion. None of you just exited out. How are you doing out there, Amy?
I'm good.
What do you think about all this?
Well, I spent 18 months in Afghanistan, so
Yep.
and they're Muslim, So I had a lot of social, ethical dilemmas there, but
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
So I mean, my biggest one was Taliban had shot down a Canadian helicopter, and we ended up with all patients, Taliban and the Canadians. And my ethical decision was, I knew the Taliban was going to die, but he was in most critical shape, so we had to give our blood to him. And it wasn't that it was Taliban, but I knew he was in bad shape. But to me, it was ethically, why are we wasting our blood on someone who's going to die anyways? Not because it was Taliban, but it's just the way of triage. So
Yeah,
that's
that's a hard one.
Talk about an ethical dilemma. Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
so.
Well, there you
So
go.
I had a lot of those ethical things, but I mean, it's okay.
What that must have been very hard too, just with the different viewpoint of women and men and
Yeah, we had a lot of children, and if they were girls, we never saw the moms. We had one little girl for 4 months, and we only saw the brother and the uncle in 4 months. Never the mom.
wow.
So.
Because the mom cannot come out of the house or whatever. Yeah.
Nope. Mm-mm. But we knew, because she had lost one leg and we were trying to save the other leg, because we knew if she went back home to her village with no legs, they would kill her or just not take care of her, because
Wow.
she didn't provide to society, or they just couldn't waste their resources taking care of her. So
Wow.
that's why we ended up with her for 4 months.
Wow.
But it was good. I mean, she was, oh boy, she knew all about Christmas, and which because she spent the holidays with us, so she learned all sorts of stuff. So
Yeah.
so.
Wow. Well, you must have just a huge heart for folks and with all that's happened in this last year.
Yeah, that was hard in August when we had to watch that. So.
And now they're people are starving and well, thanks for your there. But that's ethical issues. Yeah. Ethical dilemma. You should have been teaching this class.
Oh.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that, Amy. Yeah, a lot. Yep. All right. Well, so here's where we're at. On the 17th, which is a Monday, next week I have a council meeting Monday. So on the 17th, and I will email you, or if you want to email me to start the conversation, you also can call me, and I might just also call you, this type of thing. But we'll start. I'd love to have individual conversations with you about, are you ready to be a member of the church, or a mission partner? You do not have to become a mission partner. I use member and mission partner together, but it's the same thing. You do not need to make that decision right now to continue to participate at Silverdale Lutheran. You can come and receive the word and sacrament. You join now after this class or not. Sometimes people take this and then they think about it for a couple years or whatever. So there's no pressure here at all. But if that is something that you feel called and would like to do, I'd like to talk with you about that. And then we'll have an orientation night on the 17th. And even if you're still up in the air, you can still participate in that discussion on the 17th. We just get to a lot of practical stuff, like the campus, where's this, where's that, just so you're fully, squared away with what membership entails. So that we'll do on the 17th. And then the way you become a member is affirmation of baptism. And we'll talk about this on the 17th. But then at that night, we kind of pick a new member Sunday where we would have you confess your faith in front of the congregation as a group. And some of the people struggle with that, and I can talk to you about that, and we can work through that. If this COVID thing keeps getting worse, and we're concerned, it seems like the vaccinated folks and boosted folks that this is not that dangerous of a illness. But I know we're still discovering and figuring that out. So we could do an affirmation of baptism service here and play it before the congregation. I did that in the heart of COVID. I'd prefer not to. I'd prefer people to see you in person, but some of you may not be comfortable with coming into the church yet. So that's what we can talk about on the 17th. So I will plan to be at church on that Monday, and so we can be in person, or we can, and then also via Zoom. You don't have to be there in person, although it might be helpful. I hand out a packet of materials. So if you can make it there in person that night, that might be a helpful thing.
Do you want us to make an appointment?
You can send me an email, and we can set up a time just to talk on the phone. That would be best. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, send me an email, and if I don't get one from you, I'll send you one. and just to have a bit of a conversation and see where you're at after this journey and stuff. So yeah. Sound good?
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, let me just close this with a prayer. Gracious and loving God, thank you for this journey. Thank you for your promise that you've given us in Christ Jesus, in his life, death, and resurrection, and the significance of that event being forgiveness of sins and peace and reconciliation, justification, salvation, knowing your love. We give thanks for that gift, and may we always cherish it. And so thank you for the discussions we've had and for this time together. And I pray that we'll have many more, and that you'll be with us until we meet again. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 All
Okay.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
All right.